Hey everyone, welcome to today's edition of One Single Story, where each weekday we offer a brief lesson from a section of today's reading from the One-Year Bible, and we examine some questions that extend our learning from the sermon on Sunday. Today I'm joined by Rivenbark and Alyssa Bream, and we're looking at a passage from Proverbs chapter 8, verses 1 through 11. So let me read just a couple of the verses. Verse 1 through 3 say, "Listen as wisdom calls out, hear as understanding raises her voice. On the hilltop along the road, she takes her stand at the crossroads, by the gates at the entrance of the town, on the road leading in, she cries aloud." And then verse 10 says, "Choose my instruction rather than silver, knowledge rather than pure gold, for wisdom is far more valuable than rubies. Nothing you desire can compare with it." So earlier this week, Alyssa, we talked about Proverbs 7, where this father warned his son about the dangers of an adulterous woman. But it's hard not to notice here that now we're looking at wisdom as being depicted as a woman standing in the street, shouting out in a different way. Is that how you see it?
Biblical poetry uses personification a lot to help us understand a concept that would be harder to understand because we understand people a lot more than we understand some concepts. The writer portrays wisdom as a person to demonstrate that it isn't just a set of rules or insights. Wisdom is something that we can engage with, that we have a relationship with in a way. The passage describes wisdom as part of God's character and part of his design for the world. And that is this personification of wisdom that we see as this woman. But we also see this woman that was just a prostitute, and that was the worst thing in the world in the chapter before. So maybe this isn't about gender. I don't know. I'll just say that. But do you think that there was meant to be a contrast between those two women for us to see, Jay?
Yeah, I do, because if you read one chapter, you're gaining insight about the lack of wisdom per se, and now you're reading about wisdom. And let me just share quickly a few contrasts in those two chapters where it talks about wisdom. The place where they are. It says wisdom stands in prominent places like hilltops, crossroads, city gates, where the adulteress that was in the previous chapter was lurking in hidden places, hidden corners, hiding her actions in deception and secrecy. Then it talks about the contrast between the way they communicate. For instance, wisdom is direct and clear. It's understandable, whereas the adulterer uses flattery and manipulation. And then it contrasts the difference between the two individuals themselves and how they interact with other people. One, literally, although their relationship is destroying people, and the other one is trying to add value and add life. And I think when you look at these two contrasts, the real question you have to ask yourself about healthy relationships: are they bringing me closer to God ultimately, or are they creating distance between me and God? And I think that's where we need to draw the line, have some means to establish about relationships. Are they beneficial? Are they not? Are we getting closer? Are we getting further away?
How do you choose those relationships? What are some of the things you're looking for in people when you're trying to choose whether this is a relationship that's healthy or it's an unhealthy relationship?
Well, I think for me, the tricky part is to determine, because if I make a quick judgment about somebody because of the way they act, behave, or their past, or even their speech or language, and I may immediately say, that's not good for me, that's not healthy. I think the tricky part is to say, has God placed me in their life right now so that I can be the part of wisdom? Can I be the one that speaks into them, to help them and lead them toward God? And then I think after you establish that, I think you just have to evaluate it, because a lot of people in relationships, or at least this has been my experience on the front end, you can really be deceived by people. And you think, oh, they're great, and this is going to be a great relationship. It's going to be mutual value here. We're going to help each other draw closer to God. And then over time, you begin to see things that are red flags or complete deal breakers. And when that happens, you have to make decisions about those.
Have you ever witnessed somebody, Alyssa, in a relationship that you saw it moving them away from God? And what happened?
I've seen that happen. The thing that immediately popped into my mind was like all of these like college relationships that like college freshmen in a Christian college are some of the I'll just say this. Some of the most annoying Christians out there. And I say that as somebody who probably was one of those annoying freshman college, although I probably didn't think I was at the time. You just go from, going to church 1 to 3 times a week, and then all of a sudden you're going to church and chapel and you have Bible classes and it's like, oh my goodness, this is so awesome. I'm learning so much. I'm growing so much. And then it inevitably people start to find relationships and it starts to draw them away and they start to skip chapel and they start to miss classes and they start to do all those things. But then I've seen it in much, and I think that those ones are, I mean, that sometimes that's natural, but then I've seen it be very destructive when people have burned bridges because they've gotten into relationships that they shouldn't have, and they have hurt and just it caused like a wave of destruction. And I think we've all probably seen that.
Yeah, for me, the ones that are the easiest to spot, kind of on the heels of what you said, was when that specific relationship begins to grow and develop. It comes at the cost of all other relationships, and you're like, this not going to work out good.
I think when it costs earthly relationships, and I think you begin to see signs of spiritual decline. It's not all about church attendance, but church attendance certainly is a marker of the direction the relationship is going in. And I don't think, but most people would not describe them as bad as the woman in 7 or as good as the one in 8. But how do we learn from these extreme examples? What are some things we can learn either from the bad or the good?
Well, out of chapter 7, the young man that was in the story, I think we need to constantly remind ourselves that we can be naive. Certainly, we can be careless. We can be around things, situations, people that ultimately can be divisive or harmful to us in our relationship and walk with God and with other people, and that we just simply need to have situational awareness, to pay attention. And so that's a lesson I would like to take out of chapter 7 and out of chapter 8. It is the fact you never stop learning, you never stop evaluating, that you have to be intentional as the description of wisdom. Every one of those characteristics and qualities, wisdom is intentional about. And I think you have to be very intentional to exemplify wisdom in relationships.
I think whenever we see growth in ourselves, we can look back a year or 5 years back and say, wow, I have really started to exhibit more of this fruit of the Spirit. And I see in my relationship here that we are in a healthier place. We're not just to look at the seductress woman, we're to look at the young man who was learning from his father there and see that that was a moment of growth and that was a moment of teaching. And so I think as long as we're growing and learning, that we're in the place that God wants us to be.
The things that I would point out of the two, right? The things that I think we should pay attention to. One, she acknowledges she's married. If you observe someone betraying someone else they're in relationship with, wisdom should tell you
If they'll do it
to
you, they're going to
if they'll
do it for
with
you, they'll do it to you.
That's right.
Yep.
You should be aware, right? That's a danger. Secondly, in that story, she had gone out of her way to hide something. There's some commentary about whether she was just coming off her cycle, and so she had perfumed up her bed and flowered up her bed, and she had paid her vows. That would have been part of, the cleanliness. But always pay attention when people are hiding something, right? If it looks right. I don't think it's common to walk into a rose petal covered bed, right? You know what? And I don't mean that it's not necessarily they're trying to hide something in the bed, but be aware when people make something look way too good to be true.
I would agree. If I could share a quick example, this past week, I was in conversation with somebody who wanted to go in a venture together. And to me, it involved a lot of money. My money. That was the problem. First of all, they wanted to involve my money. They didn't have anything at stake. And, they presented this absolute gorgeous picture to me. You cannot lose. It's a win-win. And I simply began to ask a few simple questions. And I mean, immediately, in less than a minute, I'm like, no, conversation's over with. And so wisdom, I think, came into play to that. And I didn't just rely on past relationship with the person to make a decision. I looked to wisdom.
On the wisdom side, she talks about the gates to the entrance of the town, the road leading in, and she cries aloud. The takeaway for me was wisdom is obvious and clear and early if you will pay attention. If you'll pay attention, it's there. I can't think of a time where I didn't know well ahead of the trouble what it was going to be like if I had just paid attention, whether it was to listen to my parents or what the Word of God had to say or some instruction somebody else was giving me. But that's my takeaway from wisdom. Wisdom isn't. I think we make wisdom this mystical. If you live long enough, you'll get it, right? I think it's just obvious.
The little details, sometimes, is where you'll find wisdom.
I think it's obvious. So, do you think it's good to evaluate your relationships and ask, is this relationship moving me closer to God or not? And how do you deal with it when it's not?
I think as a mom with young kids, evaluating the relationships is important, but it's harder to find the relationships than it is to evaluate them. The two kind of markers that I think about when I think about having relationships, and particularly like the friendship side of things, like I have to be in a relationship with Jake because I work with him. But
I'm so sorry.
Spending time with people who have joy and who I find joy, that maybe there's a commonality of something we enjoy together. And then the other thing is a group that challenges us. I'm in a book club, and right now we're reading The Brothers Karamazov, which is like a 19th century Russian novel. And it's challenging, but it's something we're doing together and we're growing. And so I think those are the kind of relationships that I have found myself drawn to and that help me grow, not only in my relationship with God, but just in life.
Sonia and I, years ago, were in relationship with another couple. We moved away for a few years and stayed in touch periodically. We eventually came back to the same town, and when we got together, it was so apparent the growth and the difference in the place that we were on every level was so much different. And we were literally to the point you could look back and say, that used to be us. And it wasn't that we were better, but we were in a different place. And it created such a tension between us because of the gap that was there, that relationship just had to go by.
Didn't survive. Yeah.
That's exactly right.
I see couples. I was doing some premarital counseling, and they were talking about their parents and a circle of friends that they used to be in. And they made no acknowledgement as to why they weren't all still friends. But from the outside, like, it was really clear because there were at least two of the couples who were still living that. I mean, they're well into their 40s, maybe close in on 50, I would guess. That certainly in their late 40s. Still in that crazy party, wild, never grew up lifestyle. And then the others, seem to have settled down spirit, and it separates. If you don't,
Yeah.
right, you can't be in close relationship with people and not be affected by their spiritual gait.
Absolutely.
Sometimes it does require you to move on. Sometimes it requires you to pick and choose how it plays out.
Mm-hmm.
You can't be friends. It's hard to establish those relationships if you're not moving in the same direction. It's one of the reasons. Let's forget friendships. It's one of the reasons why it is important to have your faith aligned before you get married. Because if you're moving in the opposite direction, usually you're going to regress instead of progress. Well, thank y'all for joining us today on this edition of One Single Story. We hope you'll be back with us again on Monday as we continue our conversation around our daily Bible reading from the One Year Bible.